were driven by this three-story brick ghost standing over the Caney Fork River and wondered about its history. Well, that was me since the 1970s. Today, Rock Island State Park offers some insight to the silent giant that was almost forgotten by time, as well as its potential future. Come join us as we learn about the Falls City's cotton mill.
I need to bring the history to the people, so that's what we're doing. And kind of the theme of this talk is the mill in the past, the present, and the future. So, building, what is it now, and where is it going? What's the future of the mill? Welcome to the Falls City Cotton Mill. If you read the sign outside, you maybe know a little bit about the mill. But this building operated from 1892 to 1902. Very short lifespan, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Unless you read the sign, you already know. But we want to go back a little bit further. I'd like to start with Asa Faulkner. Does anybody ever heard that name before they came here today? Asa Faulkner? This fella here?
We got one.
So this is Asa Faulkner. He was not born in Tennessee, but he moved here at a young age. He apprenticed for several other textile and mill workers in this area. He was born in 1806, and this mill was constructed in 1892. So you can imagine he was an older fellow whenever this mill, well, spoiled surprises, he actually wasn't alive when this mill was finished, but he was an older fellow when this mill came to fruition. He owned 4 other mills before this one was ever built. Most of those textile mills, some of them cotton, some of them wool mills. This one was a cotton mill, so they primarily only did cotton in this mill, but they did have other mills where they did wool. They made jeans. This mill, they made heavy cotton sheeting. We'll talk about what that is here in a little bit. But this is Asa Faulkner. He chartered this mill for $30,000. Anybody know how much that might have been in 1892? $30,000. Well, he chartered it in 1886. So, any guesses?
$2 million.
30 million? That's not quite that much. It was about $1 million. So this mill was built at the cost of about $1 million in 1886. So you can imagine the family was fairly wealthy. They were doing well in their other mill endeavors. They decided to open this mill. This was kind of like their magnum opus, Falls City Mill. It was their largest, and it was kind of going to be their big hoorah as far as the textile industry goes. So they chartered the mill for $30,000. Asa actually died before the mill ever began construction, and his son Clay Faulkner actually took over overseeing this mill. He had other business partners as well that helped them oversee this project. This is Clay here. If you guys ever go to McMinnville, you can visit Falcon's Rest. This Clay Faulkner is actually the fellow who opened Falcon's Rest. So I won't get into detail about that stuff because I don't know too much about it and I don't want to say it wrong. But you can visit kind of Clay's legacy after the mill closed there at Falcon's Rest. The other business partners included Jesse Walling and H.L. Walling. If you guys are familiar with the unincorporated town of Walling across the river in White County, it's those Wallings, same people. So Clay, Jesse, and H.L., they actually came together, constructed this mill, and the first shipment went out in May of 1892. Like I said, they were making heavy cotton sheeting, and if you aren't familiar with what heavy cotton sheeting is, if you have a chance to get up to the table, on this side of the table, I have a piece of heavy sheeting here. By today's standards, this is one of the heaviest pieces of cotton sheeting I can find. It kind of feels like duck cloth or canvas, if you're familiar with the way that feels. A lot thicker than kind of what we use for today's standards as far as clothing, blankets, and things like that. But this is what they were making in the mill. If you are not familiar with how textiles were produced before the industrialization in mills, it was all done by hand on looms and spinning wheels. So you would use the spinning wheel to spin the fiber. You would then put it on a loom and weave it by hand. This is a pretty rudimentary example of a loom. Most of your folks who were weaving before the industrialization period, they had big barn looms. They were huge. And you could sit at them and weave. But we'll get back to this in a minute. I won't explain all the working pieces and parts to you, but a very well experienced weaver on a hand loom, they could weave maybe a couple yards, maybe 10 to 12, 15 yards a day. That's not very much. I mean, it is a lot. It's pretty impressive. But by the time that this mill opens, by the time they open, they send their first shipment out, they're producing 4,000 yards a day. So the industrialization really took off. If you are familiar, if you're a Civil War nerd, you know that the South was kind of behind when it came to industrialization. We didn't really get into any of this until after the Civil War too much. But some of the mills that ASA owned prior to this one were before the Civil War, and the output was very little compared to this one. So I'll tell you that they made cotton sheeting. If you're not familiar with the process of cotton sheeting, how it's made, or how the the textile world works, did anybody come in from this way across the railroad tracks?
Yes.
By the dam? So that's where we're going to start. It came in on the railroad, typically in big bundles. This is sort of an example of a cotton bundle that we have. This one's only about 20 to 25 pounds. The ones that they were bringing in by train were about 500 pounds. I'm not going to lug around a 500-pound bale, so this is what I have. They would unload it from the train depot, bring it into the mill. Typically, that process started up on the top floor because the 500-pound bale, although it was heavy, was actually lighter than the finished product of the sheeting. So you would bring it into the top floor through one of the top windows. You had folks up there, they were called lappers. Their job was just to cut the bands on the cotton here. Once all the cotton flew around, went everywhere, their job was to bring it to the carding machine. If you aren't familiar with the carding machine, and I will preface and say that these photos are not from this mill. We don't have any photos of the inside of this mill during operation, but this is a mill just over the line in Georgia that operated during the same time. They did the same thing. So I grabbed those photos so that you can see examples of what the inside of this mill may have looked like. But I do want you to be aware that this is not inside this mill. So this is the carding room, which would have been upstairs. Some of the Faulkner's other mills also were used just for carding. Some were used just for spinning. This one had the whole process from carding all the way to sheeting. So the carding machine, if you can't tell, because these pictures may be hard to see for some of you guys, the carding machine basically has a big wheel right in the middle, and it has smaller wheels that run all the way around the big wheel, and they all have pretty fine-toothed combs on them. These are also carding brushes. These were used if you're not working in a mill and you're working at home. So you can see these fine teeth. It's kind of like a dog brush. You ever brush your dog? That's kind of what it feels like. They would send that cotton in on one side. It would come through the top of the wheel, the big wheel, over the other side, and the smaller wheels that spun all the way around the big wheel actually broke that cotton down, made it a lot more finer, a lot easier to work with, and it took out most of the imperfections as far as the seed, like the seeds and the stems that weren't brought out from the ginning process that was before. You guys probably know about cotton gins. The ginning process actually happened before they ever arrived here, and then it was baled and it was brought here. The carding process is just to kind of make it a little more finer and easier to work with. And what that does is it breaks it down, makes it pretty soft, pretty pliable. Once you bring it from the carding room, you take it to the drawing room. A lot of people aren't familiar with this process in the textiles. So, and it is hard to see, but you're welcome to come up here. I'll have these photos out later. You can see these long kind of ropes, rope-like structures that are coming down from the machines. Those are actually called rows. So the cotton was put through the carding machine into the drawing room into rows, and if you see these barrels at the bottom, those are called roving barrels. If you've ever been to an antique store or something similar and you see a big barrel with a lot of maybe garden tools or umbrellas or things like that in it, typically those are roving barrels. You just don't know what you're looking at typically. So what it does is it makes it into almost like a long, it's not a rope, but it looks like a rope, and they're called rows. They come into these barrels and it goes to the next room. You would have folks who would just pick these barrels up, bring them to the next room, to the spinning room. So those rows were placed on spinning mules. Each one of these, and it's hard to see, if you guys are familiar with like sewing, you probably are familiar with these bobbins. So these are large bobbins. They're fairly large, maybe 8 to 12 inches long, depending on which model of mule you're using. This mule specifically had 3,600 spindles. So I can't tell you how many are on this mule, but it's quite a few. So you had 3,600 spindles running at any given time, as opposed to the next largest mill that the Faulkners owned during the time only had about 600 spindles. So they went from 600 to 3,600. It really jumped up their production. Once that roving is put on here, it turns it into pretty fine thread. What that mule does is it moves back and forth. It's automatic. Do we have any kids here? Any young ones? Yeah, raise your hand, kids. So this would have been one of Keith. So if you were a young child, the spinning room is probably where you spent a lot of your time, because this machine moved back and forth constantly. Sometimes things would break down. Sometimes things needed to be swept out from under the machines. You would have duff fall down, and us adults, we can't really fit under those machines. So that's where we would send the kids in. The kids would crawl into this thing as it's continuously moving. They would replace bobbins as they needed to be replaced. They would fix things on the machine that needed to be fixed, and if they couldn't fix it, it would be brought to the machine shop here, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But if you were lucky, you left at the end of the day with all your fingers, all your toes. Maybe, maybe not. We don't have any accounts in this mill of serious bodily injury or harm. So people ask me if this mill's haunted. As far as I know, I haven't seen anybody here besides us. So we don't have any reports of injuries or deaths, but there probably were at least some injuries. I'm sure some smashed fingers and smashed toes and things like that, but nothing too serious. But the spinning room was mostly ran by kids. Once those bobbins came off the mule, they would take it to the warping room. So this is where you make your warp. And you can see all the bobbins in the background of this photo. Maybe you can't, but if you can't, you can come up later and see. So these are all bobbins running to this machine, which is the warp. So on a loom, you have your warp and you have your weft. Some people are probably weavers here, and I'm not. So I know the basics. So if I tell anything wrong, feel free to correct me. There's a warp and a weft on a loom. And so your warp is actually this piece that runs horizontally. So you can see here, this is your warp. And your weft is this piece that moves up and down. So the way it works on the big loom, and it's all automated, you make your warp, you put your warp into the loom, you have to thread it through. Now on these mechanical looms that were in this mill, of course, they're gonna be fairly large, probably about this big. And you're gonna have to thread everything through, get everything set up, and then you have a shuttle, which mine fell down. And I also have a shuttle, but I forgot it at home, so I apologize for that. This is the shuttle you get to see today. So this is your shuttle, and on these looms, they were automatic. So they would actually shoot back and forth continuously. So you can see this little part I've weaved up here. That took me maybe like 10 minutes to do. Let me turn it this way so you can see a little better. So you can see it's coming out on this end, and as I raise and lower this, do you see the warp moving?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's doing this, and what you're doing is sending that shuttle through, and that's actually weaving between the warp. Everything in here was automatic. You don't have to weave by hand, but that's essentially what you're looking at here is the warp. That's what they're creating in this photo, is the warp that runs horizontally. And then they would take the warp, bring it to the weaving room, and these are the looms that they use actually in most mills during that time. These are Lancaster looms. Any of you guys ever been to Massachusetts to the
Servage?
which one?
Servage.
Yeah, I think so. Most of those mills up there produced, they actually patented most of the machinery that was used throughout the country. So these are Lancaster looms, and what they were doing here was taking the warp, putting it on, the shuttle automatically shot back and forth through the weft and created your heavy cotton sheeting in this mill. So like I said, there were several of these going on at any given time. Most of the machinery in this mill operated at a decibel level similar to a chainsaw, so we're all familiar with how loud a chainsaw is. There were 136 looms in this mill. Like I said, there was 3,600 spindles, so that probably was at least a dozen mules. You also have the carding machines up top, all running at the same time, hundreds and hundreds of machines that are as loud as a chainsaw. So most people suffered hearing loss while working in mills. Most people had respiratory problems because it was so dusty in here. Most people had smashed fingers, smashed toes. So that's where the windows really come into play, and I haven't talked about the windows on the mill yet, but you guys see that they're boarded up. That's unfortunately because we had a lot of vandalism going over the last couple of decades, so we had to board the windows up. But those windows were used for ventilation. They were used for lighting. Now, you probably know this already, but we didn't have lights in the mill in 1892. The windows provided all the lighting, provided a little bit of place for the noise to escape, also created ventilation for some of that dust to kind of come out so that people weren't breathing it in constantly. But from there, they would take it off the loom, and then they could optionally dye the material. So they either had a standard white finish, which is just no dye at all, or they had almost like a dark brown finish, which if you see, this up here is actually one of the straps that ran the machinery. This is not heavy cotton sheeting, but this is one of the straps, and it would have been dyed this brown color. And when I say it's one of the straps, it's kind of hard for you to see, but if you come up and look at some of these photos later, up on the ceiling, let me find a good one. Up on the ceiling on these huge beams, you would have had these wheels up here. You guys would maybe see those, maybe you can. If you can't, feel free to come up later. But there's straps running from these wheels, and that's what actually ran to the machinery. And so the straps that ran from machinery to wheel, that's what we have here. This is one of the original from this mill. It's one of two only original things that we have, including the stamp, which I'll talk about in just a minute. We're almost there. So once they would optionally dye it, they would then stamp it. And if you guys have t-shirts or anything that has a brand name on it, maybe Hanes or Fruit of the Loom or what have you, that's how you know who made it. So same thing with this stamp here. It reads Falls City Cotton Mills. That's what they would stamp, and they would sell to people. That way they knew who they were getting their cotton sheeting from. Early on in the mill's history, they were selling mostly to local dry goods stores in McMinnville and some even in Nashville. But by 1898, we do know that this mill was selling their cotton sheeting to the federal government. Anybody know what was going on in 1898 while they may have been doing that?
Spanish-American War.
Spanish-American War. You're the first person who's ever answered. Yeah, how fun. Yeah, Spanish-American War. So Clay Faulkner was making several trips to Washington during that time. And it is reported through the Southern Standard, which is the newspaper in McMinnville, that he was selling to the federal government. They were selling their heavy sheeting. So it's interesting to think that, and this kind of plays back in, this is the reason I tell you about Cordell Hull. Cordell Hull was in the Spanish-American War. So it's interesting to think that Cordell Hull may have used something that was made in this mill. It kind of connects our state parks. It's an interesting thing to think about. So this mill was ran off of water. It was hydro powered. Behind us is the Caney Fork River. You can kind of hear that a little bit. If you go outside, you can see it. The Caney Fork River is very prone to flooding. It's hard to control. And in the time when the mill was open, there was no dam upstream. The dam did not exist until about 20 years later. So if it rained a lot, the river kind of blew up. If it didn't rain at all, the river really shrunk down. So this mill pretty much figuratively and literally lived and died by the river. The water wheel and the turbine housing that housed that wheel are actually still down in the river, and the gorge is open today. So if you are feeling pretty adventurous, you can actually go down there and see them after this. But the wheel and the housing sat about right in the middle of this back wall, which you can't see, and I'll talk about why you can't see it in a minute while these walls are here. But in this photo here, there was it's easy to see this diversion wall. This is a water diversion wall. You can see all these ladies standing up on top of it. That was actually made to funnel some of the water from the main river channel around that wall into the turbine housing to spin the wheel. And on this spot right here, it's kind of covered up, but you can see something trussed up and holding. That's where the turbine housing would have been, and that's where the wheel was. And it shot through a series of pulleys and ropes and shafts. It came up through this infrastructure into the back of the mill, and that's what actually powered everything in the mill. There is a spot back here, which we can't see unfortunately, where you can see where it did come up. They have a spot in the back of the rock wall back there where it's cut out too. So it's easier to see if you're back there. Unfortunately, you can't get back there anymore. That's how everything was ran. In 1902, the river flooded. There was a 100 years flood. Funny enough, 100 years floods happen more than every 100 years here, it seems like. But that was on Good Friday in 1902. The river flooded. At the time of the flood in Warren County, where we are now, there were 32 mills that were in operation. After the flood, there were only 12 left standing, so 20 of those mills actually got completely washed away. Out of those 12 mills, there were only 6 that continued operation, and this was one of the 6 that was standing but did not continue operation. The Faulkner family just decided to cut their losses here. Some of their other mills were still in working shape. They decided to keep on with those, and Clay decided to open up Falcon's Rest in McMinnville. Just kind of like a spa type deal. So the mill did live and die by the river, and it's unfortunate. But if you do happen to go down into the gorge today, I'll show you what you're looking for. So this is actually the turbine housing. It's about as big as your car. It's a big piece of cast iron, and you can see it has one large opening here. There's also one on this other side, and there's one up here on the top. So the water would have been funneled through one end or the other, and then spun the wheel, and then come out the other end, and all the shafts and infrastructure came out of the top here into the mill. So that's actually still down there in the river. And then this is the wheel. It's about as big as your car tire. And this was actually a horizontal spinning wheel. Most of you are probably familiar with the vertical wheels that spin this way. You had your grist mills mostly that spin that way. This one actually spun this way. And all these openings that you see around the wheel, probably every other opening would have had a slat in that to actually catch that water and help spin the wheel. But if you go down the old Mill Gorge Trail right here at the end of the parking lot, go all the way to the bottom, hang a sharp right and follow this bluff that the mill's on, all the way up to Great Falls, you'll actually be able to see the turbine housing and the wheel. You'll see the housing first. It's hard to miss. It's a huge piece of cast iron. And then if you go just a little further up, closer to the falls, you actually see the wheel kind of laying right down halfway in the water. So those are still down there today. And that's a little bit about what the mill did and how it operated. Does anybody have any questions about that? Because sometimes I totally forget stuff.
Real quick, so you're
Yes.
saying this whole thing was water powered, so it had a series of shafts that you could engage and run the machinery?
Yes. Yeah. So typically with the machines, there was a wheel, a small wheel that was on the machine, and then a small wheel right beside the machine that was actually stationary. It didn't spin. So if they needed to move that strap over to the machine, they could do that. If they didn't want it to run, they would move it back over to the other wheel that was stationary. So.
Any thoughts or attempts on trying to recover that stuff and bring it up here for display purposes?
Yes. Yeah. That's in just a minute. Yeah. So that's what the mill was between 1902 and where we are now. Well, TEPCO came in. If you guys aren't familiar with TEPCO, that's the Tennessee Electric Power Company. They're the ones who actually built the dam and the powerhouse located downstream from here. They built a lot of the infrastructure in the park too. This whole parking area was built by them. The stairs that go down into the old Mill Gorge Trail was built by them. The spring castle across the street was built by TEPCO. So they came in and they used this building more or less for storage and office space. And that's where you see the walls that are in the mill today. These walls would have not been here from 1892 to 1902. This would have been a big open floor. You need as much room as possible when you have the mill operating. The other 2 floors do not have any dividing walls. But another interesting thing that they do have on the 2nd and 3rd floor, we have the names of many folks who worked here. They etched their names along the walls all the way around on the 2nd and 3rd floor. We had a grad student in, well, I say we, I was like pretty young. I was a kid. In 1998, we had a grad student from MTSU come in. She cross-referenced the 1900 census records with the names of the people who etched their names on the walls here. And she found about 85% of those people to be matching up. So we know for a fact they lived here. We know for a fact that that's their names. And I did fail to mention that most of the people who worked here were women or children. And the Faulkners primarily employed women or children in most of their mills. Mostly widows who had lost their husbands, and mostly those children. We do have in those census records too, from head of household, so you'll have grandparents all the way down to kids, so everybody from 70 years old all the way to 5 years old working in this mill, the whole family. Their other option typically was to be a farmer or a laborer on a farm somewhere around here. So it was either work there or work here, and a lot of people actually chose to work here. So getting back to TEPCO, they use this area as a office space and as a storage space while the dam and the powerhouse were being built. So that was used for that function all the way up until about the 30s when TVA kind of absorbed TEPCO. Are we all familiar with TVA? Tennessee Valley Authority.
Just a little
So that's who actually owns and operates the dam and the powerhouse today. They use this for the same purpose. The park was established in 1969. So when the state park system we leased this from TVA, we took this over. And this was actually our maintenance area up until about the 80s. So this is where our maintenance crew worked out of. Once the maintenance facility right down the road was built, they moved out of this building, and this has been more or less vacant since the 80s. So this is kind of what it's looked like. It's a big empty building now. That gets us caught up all the way to today, where we're going to talk about what are we going to do with the building now. So we do have the green light to restore the building. We have the funds appropriated, and we have the okay. Unfortunately, we have to have the road moved. So the road that's right behind you that you can drive on and reach out and touch the building, we have to move that road. Well, it's not us, it's TDOT. So currently the park system, state parks, TVA, and TDOT are all trying to work together to get the road moved. Does anybody else work for the government?
Yes.
Yeah. So
have
so
which is
you've got
worse.
the federal government
How far do
and
you
the
have
state
to move
government working together.
How far does it have to move?
That's an oxymoron.
Yeah. So it's been slow, but they're going to move it just up on the other side of the peninsula there, behind the castle. So as you come in to the park by the dam, that'll be where you see your first A-frame sign. We'll have A-frame signs kind of set up around the park that tell you a little bit about the project.
Yeah.
But the corridor has already been cut out for the road to be moved.
Yeah.
As TDOT was making their way through the corridor, they'd already done the preliminary surveys. They know where the road's going to go. They're cutting through. They find a giant underground power line, and they say, "Oh, I wonder where this came from." That's actually the power line for the dam. So they almost cut through that. So then they said, well, we can't put the road on top of the dam power line. So they're currently exploring other options on where to put the road. But it will still generally go in the same area. So it'll come out right there close to the Collins Prairie Trail parking lot. So it'll come out there, come around this way, and come back out right over here close to the dam. So once the road is moved, we're hoping to get the building restored, which probably won't be a very quick process either. And that's when we're going to be looking into contractors to actually get some of this stuff out of the river. Just because it's too heavy for us to pick up and carry out, we'll have to get a lot of heavy equipment down here to probably put a big crane over here on the overlook and get it that way. But that's kind of where the mill is going in the future. So this is one of the only parks in Tennessee that you can actually come visit a mill. This is the only mill in Warren County that was built prior to 1930 that's still standing. And it's pretty important to the people who live here. It's also important to the people who visit here that they would like to see this mill kept up and restored for sure. So the reason we're doing these programs is that so we can kind of tell you guys, whether you knew about that or not, about kind of where we're going and what this building is going to be hopefully in the future. When it is restored, we're hoping that it'll be, we all have what we hope it'll be. I hope it'll be some sort of visitor center / museum, so we can actually put up a more permanent display about the mill in here rather than just the one sign outside. And once we get those other items from the river up here, turn it into more of an official museum about the whole park, not just the mill, because there's a lot of other cool history around the park, not just in the mill. Some people want it to be a restaurant. That's probably okay to me. Some people want it to be a hotel. Man, that could be okay too. But we'll see what it is. We'll see what it's going to be. But we just want to reach out to everyone else and let you guys know about what the plans are. And if there's anything that you would like this mill to be, just reach out to your local legislators and let them know you're interested. Because we tell our boss's boss that we need this building to be restored, we need the road to be moved. They don't really listen to us, but as soon as you guys start telling them these things, it typically happens pretty quick. So we're reaching out to you for help. If you want to see this building get restored before it falls down and they say, well, we just can't do anything about it now, which is not going to fall down. If it was going to, we wouldn't be in here. It's structurally sound. It's very structurally sound. But that's about all I have for you guys. Do you have any questions?
Where did the cotton come from? The source of Europe?
So we don't have a lot of documentation on almost anything, but what we can kind of interpret is that the cotton came from fairly local, not Tennessee.
The spring castle is an elaborate spring house built while the textile mill was in operation.
Thanks for watching, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. And if you're ever in the Middle Tennessee area, consider giving Rock Island State Park a visit. Bye!